Hey, everybody. Welcome to Bookish, the virtual program on authors and thinkers and the literary life, brought to you by the Southern California News Group and the Bay Area News Group. I'm Sam Dunn. I'm the special projects editor at the Southern California News Group and a book nerd and an author myself. I want to say thank you to the Reader Reward subscribers and to all of you who've made our ongoing programs so popular. And by the way, if you're a Reader Rewards member attending tonight, you're automatically entered to win a $50 gift card from Barnes & Noble, which could come in really handy because we're going to have a lot of great book recommendations by the end of the show. Before we get started, a couple notes. If you're attending, are muted to allow for the free flow of conversation among panelists. But don't worry, if you've got a question, please use the Q&A feature on your Zoom toolbar. And if you want to talk, and we hope you do, please also enjoy the chat, which is also on your Zoom toolbar. Now it is one more thing. This session is being videotaped, and a link will be sent to you so you can share or just revisit your favorite moments. It's also posted to the scng.com/virtual event site, where you can find all of our past shows, as well as see what's coming up. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our bookish host. She is a writer, performer, and radio commentator. Her work has been heard on NPR's Morning Edition and This American Life. She's a contributing editor to The Atlantic and host of the syndicated radio Minute, the Lowdown on Science, the author of many books. Her most recent is The Mad Woman and the Roomba, beaming to us from beautiful Pasadena, and hot Pasadena, I imagine today. Please welcome my friend Sandra Tsing Loh. Hey, buddy, what's up?
Hello. Happy Juneteenth.
Happy Juneteenth.
Oh my God, what a week this is. California has just opened and so exciting. We can make plans to go out. We can get into traffic. We can park in a parking structure, level 3, 4, 5. We can forget where our ticket is and start sweating or we can just pour a glass of wine, prep our favorite snack, and with pants or no, comfy pants, enjoy another armchair adventure on Bookish.
Yes, and we're renewed for season 4, which, you guys, is going to fall on the 3rd Friday of every month now through the end of the year. So we hope you'll join us.
Oh my gosh, we have so many names coming. We're big stuff now. It's like Carl Hyacin, Joyce Carol Oates, Lemony Snicket, Daniel Handler, Charles Yu, Mary Roach, Henry Winkler, John Lithgow. I mean, that's what we're up to.
We've got a lot, but in the meantime, viewers, if you want more Sandra, and who wouldn't really, you can stream your 2015 solo show, The Bitch is Back, on demand June 23rd through the 30th, right?
Yep.
Let me tell you, it's a hilarious romp through menopause, which words that I thought I would never say, but it's hilarious. Tickets include a live virtual happy hour with Marlo Thomas, Mary Lou Henner, Melanie Mayron, JoBeth Williams, and who knows who else you're get into those fun happy hours. More info at thebroadstage.org.
Yeah, and I must say, viewers, even if you're not one of America's 50 million women 45 and up, you know someone who is. So come on, I hope you'll join us for the ride. It's a fun party and kind of informative too, and there are those happy hours. So broadstage.org. But for today on Bookish, oh my goodness, it's a very big show.
Bye-bye. You got a lot to go. You got a lot to do.
We have Dean Koontz. We have Peggy Orenstein. And now we turn to our very first guest, Lisa C. So Lisa C, the 30-second download. Ms. C is the New York Times bestselling author of The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane, Snowflower and the Secret Fan, Peony in Love, Shanghai Girls, China Dolls, and Dreams of Joy, which debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. She is also the author of On Gold Mountain, which tells the story of her Chinese-American family settlement in Los Angeles. Ms. C has also written a mystery series whose books include Flower Net, The Interior, and Dragon Bones that take place in China. Her books have been published in 39 languages. Lisa C's new novel, The Island of Sea Women, about the free diving women of South Korea's Jeju Island, has been called stupendous, enthralling, and engrossing by Booklist. An amazing read. It's now out in paperback. Welcome, Lisa C.
Thank you, Sandra. It's so wonderful to see you.
It is so wonderful to, and we'll see each other in person soonish.
I hope.
So to set up a little context here, for those few who are not familiar with your work, you've explored many fascinating Asian worlds in your books. A very famous example is Snowflower and the Secret Fan, which is also made into a movie, where you travel to a remote area in China, perhaps just the second outsider ever to visit, I think, to research a secret writing invented and used by women for over 1,000 years, and it traces this amazing friendship. So in The Island of Sea Women, you explore not just freediving women in South Korea, but their unique female-centered society. Can you describe this special community for our audience?
Right. So this is a matrifocal society, not a matriarchy, but a society focused on women. And so these women, like you said, are free divers. They take deep breaths. They dive down about 60 feet. That's deep enough to get the bends. They harvest seafood. And so they're the breadwinners in their families, and their husbands are the ones who stay home, take care of the babies, do the cooking, take care of the house, take care of the elders. And so, they would dive in these collectives of about 30 people, 30 women, but they also followed a kind of buddy system, with two people always looking out for each other. And so this idea of friendship, which is universal, to me, that idea is taken to this whole life and death level, because every time you go in the water, you're putting your life in your diving partner's hands, and she's literally putting her life in your hands as well.
And I loved in this, and I'm Chinese German, raised in Malibu, so I will butcher anything I try to pronounce. But I love the idea of the Halmong, which means both grandmother and goddess,
Right.
and that the ancients and that the older women were the wise women. And I just found that so inspiring and interesting.
Yes. And I mean, and speaking of, menopause, the idea that an older woman, you could look at her as a grandmother, but also as a goddess. And of course, we know that's true, right?
Yeah.
Or it should be.
Yeah. And I think, the bond of friendship is something that you write about a lot in your books. It's a very rich theme of friendships between women. So what draws you as a writer to that particular theme?
Well, first of all, I am a woman. I write about women, and most of my readers are women, not all of them, but most of them. And I write about these uniquely female relationships, mothers and daughters, sisters, best friends. And the thing why I always go back to friendship is that it is a unique relationship for us. We will tell a friend something that we wouldn't tell our husband, our boyfriend, our lover, our mother, our children. It's a very unique type of intimacy. And so whenever you are opening up your heart and vulnerable, you are also vulnerable to being hurt and betrayed. And so I think that's why, I keep going back to it. I guess wherever I sort of see that dark shadow side of female friendship, that's exactly where I want to go.
Yeah, and I think that you've also talked about that it's literature with women characters in it, and that we sort of haven't had that much of it in the history.
We haven't. Yeah, we really haven't. I mean, if you go back and, hundreds of years, how many women were there? You could say the Bronte sisters, you could say Jane Austen, Emily Dickinson, George Eliot, but then you get all the way up to Virginia Woolf. That's now 100 years ago, and things start to speed up. But even today, there are more men published than women. And so if you think about the sort of what we call like the Western canon, but I think you could include the whole world in that you have centuries of stories told about women written by men. I mean, I often think, like, how different would Anna Karenina have been if it had been written by a woman? I mean, all of these stories. And so to actually be telling stories from the perspective of a woman, written by a woman, I think that this is like, we're just starting to, we really are on the tip of the iceberg of that, because there's so many stories to be told that really haven't been told from a female perspective.
And I love what was so exciting about reading this book is it's in a way an adventure story, because these deep divers, it is very physically punishing. It's fascinating when a scientist comes to the island to do research on their incredible physical prowess that's so fascinating. And I think reading the beginning of the book, you get the sense of girlhood on a new journey, and it's exciting and fun. And I think, and June Lisa's mother, they're talking about Switzerland, which is they're fascinated with Heidi. It's not a land of goddesses. I'll buy myself a bicycle and I will adventure out. And I think that heroism is just so thrilling to read about, and their physical prowess as well.
Yeah,
go ahead. No, go.
No, what I was going to say was when I first wrote the book, I really connected to that physical part, that, how brave and courageous and what persistence and endurance they have just on a purely physical level. They have been recognized as having the greatest ability of any human group on Earth to withstand cold water. So, which is a lot different than just cold air, right? We know that if you go outside and it's 55 degrees, it's okay. But if you got in a pool that was 55 degrees, you get really cold really fast. So they have this ability. But, over this last year, and I really saw this change actually with readers as well, where, when it was out in hardcover, it was all about that physical prowess. But in the last year or so, people really focused instead on the sort of psychological strength, endurance, courage, and bravery that these women have. And I will say that for me, over this last year or so, whenever I would get kind of down, and there were plenty of times that I would just think, okay, but remember these women and what they do and what they, have been able to, what they face, not just in the ocean, but in their lives, in all the wars that have been there, and, the terrible sacrifices they've had to make life better for themselves and their families.
But again, one of the wonderful, rich things that you do in this book is that the physical and emotional are paired together, that we won't give away all the plot details, but there's one character, I won't say which, who suffers through a tragedy below the ocean and then emerges with superhuman strength of being able to hold her breath longer because she's endured this. So there's a lot of ways that you continue weaving together this rich story of these women, which makes it endlessly fascinating. Now, speaking of readers, we have one, Catherine Hansen, who wrote a note to you, if I might share it. Catherine Hansen writes, I was in Malaysia in 2017 and saw several pictures of calendar girls in an antique shop. I immediately thought of your book. You have given me and my sisters so much pleasure. We grew up in San Francisco and have a strong connection with the Chinese community. We have heard many family stories about our friends' parents and grandparents. For that reason, your books have a special meaning. So Catherine's note made me think, as I've been reading a little bit about your mother, the late great writer and teacher, Carolyn C., about something that she said to you in an interview where she said she had a hunch you picked up many of your storytelling skills from your wonderful grandmother, Stella C. So I wonder, Lisa, if you place a special value on stories our grandparents tell us, or even the stories our grandparents' lives have to tell us.
Absolutely. I mean, my family had a Chinese antique store in Chinatown, and it was, these brothers and a sister all worked together. And at the end of the day, they would sit together, they'd have a drink and, snacks, and they would tell these fantastic stories, about my great grandfather and how he'd come here alone as a boy and used to sell tickets to see his stuffed mermaid. And, oh yes, we still have that mermaid somewhere around here. How he was the first Chinese in America to own an automobile, how he had, 4 wives, 12 children, the last born when he was in his 90s, long before the age of Viagra, so a real accomplishment. I mean, these were fantastical stories in a sense, and told to me in a place that was filled with this really old, really, really old furniture and different, porcelains and things like that. But my mother isn't here, so I can't say, oh, Ma, come on, because her side of the family, they were serious storytellers. My mother's father, he was an old Texas newspaper man, and he could spin a yarn. Let's just say that. He really knew how to tell stories, and my mother was no slouch at storytelling, as you know. Yes. So I think, I really do think that I didn't imagine myself becoming a writer when I was a kid, but as a child, I did hear stories all the time. And some of them were about the family, but some of them were just like, I think they were making stuff up, you know? And so how you take, and that happens in immigrant families, right? Because you have to, so how you tell those stories, whether they're real or imagined, and to have grown up in that. And again, from both sides of my family, it clearly made an impact on me.
Well, thank you so much. This has been amazing to chat with you. And the book, The Island of Sea Women, is a fantastic read. It's out now in paperback, and you can get all of other Lisa C's books. We'll put in the chat or link to your website. So thank you so much for joining us on this round. And
thank you so much. I'm so happy to see you. And next time, I hope I get to see you in person. I hope we don't have to wait too much longer.
Absolutely.
And bye to everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So many fans. Okay, which brings us to our next guest, Peggy Orenstein, who's joining us, I believe, from Berkeley. For 3 decades, award-winning journalist Peggy Orenstein has brought us news we were maybe afraid to hear, but needed to. Her New York Times bestsellers include Boys and Sex, Girls and Sex, Cinderella Ate My Daughter, and Waiting for Daisy, as well as Don't Call Me Princess, the classic Schoolgirls, and Flux, Women on Sex, Work, Love, Kids, and Life in a Half-Changed World. As I like to say, for me, when I don't want to worry about my children and I just want to throw pots and pans at my male partner. Peggy has also written for the New York Times, LA Times, Washington Post, New York, The Atlantic, and the New Yorker. Peggy's TED Talk, which you can go directly on her website and look at, is called What Young Women Believe About Their Own Sexual Pleasure. It has been viewed over 5.4 million times and counting. Welcome, Peggy.
Ta-da!
Ta-da!
Hey, look, twinsies.
So
I'd like to cede my time back to Lisa because that was so interesting. I just I have a million questions for her and for you. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. You can't cede your time. You have to, but you can go after. Okay. So I went boo like this because you tweeted hilariously when you learned who was sharing the bill with you, Lisa C, but also Dean Koontz. You hilariously tweeted, "Am I scarier than Dean Koontz?"
I am.
What did you mean by that, Peggy? I think I know you. Yeah.
I had just this week. I had a pretty long opinion piece in the New York Times about pornography literacy and the need to talk to our teenagers about pornography and help them decode what they're going to inevitably see in order to make sure that they have a healthy perspective. And I think that most parents were absolutely, I mean, that's like Dean Koontz level horror to think that you have to, I mean, first of all, the only thing ickier than thinking about your parents watching porn is thinking about your kids watching it. But also I think most of us would rather poke ourselves in the eye with a fork than have that discussion. I think you're nodding very strongly, Sandra. So I suspect that I just described your situation.
Yeah, and you had talked about it's 12-year-old son right there. So yeah, indeed. And I think you described, several schools actually banning Peggy Orenstein's book, and your books are so amazing and measured and critically acclaimed. And you wrote, one school and then the next you said, same ostrich, different ostriches, same sand. And I thought that was a hilarious tale, but of course I am, like so many parents, we are ostriches. Yeah. So I am the perfect interviewer for you, representing all the other ostriches. Mm-hmm. So if we could gently walk our way through this and people can clutch their pearls as they go, in terms of telling us, and I think what your point about that, the online porn piece is that as opposed to, I'm going to imagine back in the day, the dad's Playboys in the downstairs den up on a shelf, that now you're saying it's so much more available to our kids.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's been this enormous change, not only with the smartphone and the internet and all of that, but with the advent of Pornhub, which dropped the paywall on pornography. So suddenly anything that you can imagine, and a whole lot of things nobody wants to imagine, are free, available, accessible, anonymous. And this is not, you could have a discussion. Okay, first of all, I would like to say, we're talking about adults. We're not talking about adults, we're talking about children. Adult porn use is a different situation. And also curiosity about sex is natural, masturbation, yay, good for boys, good for girls, anybody between or beyond those designations. But, and we could talk about ethical porn or queer porn or feminist porn or any of this, but that all is behind a paywall. And what kids can access over and over shows porn is, or sex is something that men do to women, female performance as a pleasure as a performance for male satisfaction, unrealistic bodies. And there's all this research that I cite about sort of what we're seeing as the impact of that on teenagers. But in a lot of ways, to me, it was that piece. I quote a boy who said that there was a boy who was legend on his crew team in his high school because he stopped using porn. And they said, "What do you do?" And he said, "I use my imagination." And they all went, "Whoa, how do you do that?" And I get that a lot from boys. I mean, they could, but it just wasn't, it was so much easier that, and to think, and I think that to me is like in some ways the saddest part of it, that sense of being hijacked, their imagination being hijacked and not having the opportunity to develop a kind of internal sense of sexual fantasy.
So to go back for a moment, I mean, you're since 1994, I think that's when Schoolgirls came out. You've really been known about writing about girls and women in American culture. From the princess stuff, the Cinderella stuff. And I just want to let all the other ostriches know that Peggy Orenstein is so funny. And you'll enjoy the books. It can seem like, oh no, and I love the thing that you said to your daughter about Disney heroines. Are your eyes bigger than your wrists? And look at her waist. Where do you think she keeps her uterus? In her purse? I mean, it's hilarious that you've talked about how girls get under that princess thing. And what is all that about? And then you wrote about women taking these unrealistic expectations into their marriages and beyond. So what can you tell a little bit about how you turned to boys of all people in this book?
Not something I ever imagined in a million years. And, obviously I had only had half a conversation when Girls and Sex came out. But also, and parents, kids, they were all saying, what about the boys? What about the boys? But I really resisted it. I felt like, first of all, it was girls' lives that had changed so much under feminism. And that was what I'd been looking at all these years. But also, teenage boys, like not so much a reputation for chattiness, and I really worried that I would have entire transcripts that would consist of, nope. I mean, I didn't know. And one of the biggest surprises to me in writing about boys was how eager they were to talk and what insightful narrators they were of their own experience. And I think it was because, nobody ever asks them. So they really took the opportunity seriously. And I know I'm not their parent. It would have been different, I'm sure, if I were their parent, but they took the opportunity seriously when somebody said, I really want to know what's going on in your head. And they really told me. And I also worried, I'll say that as a woman, I didn't know how they would talk to me. And if you read the book, it's pretty clear. I mean, it may be that for everything that, maybe they didn't tell me, there was something different that they did tell me because that I was a woman, especially around emotions. But it's also pretty clear that they weren't pulling any punches in terms of their language and their the way that they, talked about guys and sex.
Yeah, and first of all, it's like you're like a combat journalist going in where a few others fear to tread. But I think some fascinating things were like that they may not have had these conversations with their fathers. Surprise, surprise, because male to male, that can be a hard thing to break down that conversational barrier, but that you did. And I think that that's part of the amazement of reading the book is we think of boys as being so tough and monosyllabic and just on their video games, etc. But I think that your book is so fascinating because you describe these codes that they live under also in the way that girls do also. So that may be a front that they're putting up. And these stories that you tell are really extraordinary and they did talk to you. And I think there's a lot of nuance in the book as well, which you write about so beautifully.
Yeah, well, thanks. I mean, and I have to credit the boys. I mean, certainly there were interviews that didn't go well, but the ones that did are in the book. But yeah, and it was so much, when I wrote about the girls, a lot of it was about disconnection from body, disconnection from pleasure, a sort of like from the neck down. With boys, a lot more of it was about disconnection from heart. And I felt like so much of what they were talking about with me I mean, they were talking about sex. We were talking about all these things. We were talking about consent. We were talking about all those lines, all that stuff that's going on right now. But it was also about vulnerability and the sort of taboo against it for them, and the, you know, the embracing, the rejection, you know, walking these lines, and the ways that they were denied so many emotions and so much capacity for vulnerability. And, you know, Brene Brown, the genius Brene Brown, says that vulnerability is the secret sauce that holds relationships together. So when we are undermining boys' capacity for vulnerability, we're really undermining their ability to have the kinds of personally fulfilling, connected relationships that we want them to be able to have as adults. And that hurts them, and it radiates outward and hurts their romantic partners.
Yeah, and I think there was a term that I'd never seen before, emodiversity, which is the ability to experience and a lot of different kinds of emotions, and that's important for emotional health. And I had never thought about that, you know, to give them the full spectrum of feelings, and that as early as in kindergarten, you say it starts where they start, you know, they start stuffing down their emotions.
They describe it as putting a wall up between their true selves and the world. And it was really interesting. And it was really where I wanted to start in the book before I got into things like, you know, pornography, sexual assault, you know, hookup culture, all the things that we're going to put parents' hair on end. Because it also really was I mean, I was sort of easing you in, but it was also because it was so much of the foundation, and you really can't understand all those other things unless you understand what's going on with boys' emotional lives.
So again, one thing I want to point out again to our other ostriches who are both terrified and hanging on there, as they listen, because I think it is very hard, and I still find it really challenging as a parent. We're reading your book going, okay, so I got to put this book down, go to my kids who are 19 and 20, and so, you know, and it can be hard to think through. But I think with reading your books, they're so engaging, and they're you. I mean, it seems like such a scary topic, and then as soon as you, Peggy, start talking, it's like it's comforting because you're very one-on-one and personal. And I think that we have this idea of journalism as being the unbiased truth, and this is what happened. But your way of writing your books is very engaging, that you yourself are a character as a narrator. You go, this is what they see when they look at me. These could be my biases when I go in. I think especially with Boy, you know, it's kind of like, he was like, not like my nightmare of kind of the monosyllable, like this looked like this was going to be the tough interview because of what I thought. And then you learn something different. So I wonder how you evolved to this style of writing in your journalism.
Oh, well, thank you for noticing, because I work really hard on my voice as a writer. And you know, there's a couple different things. One was in my earlier days as a writer, because I tend to be, you know, seen as a feminist writer, I had difficulty getting things published. And I had a lot of editors who would say, you're writing a feminist screed. And I had to think very hard about, and I think there's much more openness to that now, but I had to think very hard about my stance and my tone, so that, and I learned to be funny, really. I learned to inject that humor because it got people on my side. But also in terms of, I mean, the, you know, impartiality is crap, but in terms of the, what you were saying about exposing my own biases and myself as a character, when I wrote my first book, Schoolgirls, I had this, so I was following two groups of 8th grade girls through their 13th year and writing about what happened. And I was developing these relationships with them because I wasn't just interviewing them once, I was seeing them every day for a year. And things would happen. And finally, one of the things that happened was that one of the girls swallowed a whole bunch of Tylenol PM. So it was a sort of suicide attempt. And she wrote in her journal, which she was giving to me, you know, good, I hope I die. I did this. I hope I die. I'm going to, you know, and I know Peggy's going to read this. And, you know, whatever, I can't remember exactly what it was. And it was like 30 years ago, but I just sat there with that. And I was, you know, I think I was 30 years old. And I thought, what do I do? What, you know, I had told them that what they said to me was private, except for that I was going to write about it, obviously. But so I had to make a decision about how to handle that moment. It was a really pivotal moment for me. And I told her that I had to tell somebody in her life. I could tell her school counselor, I could tell her mother, but I had to tell somebody. And when I sat down to write about it, I just wrote that out. I said, you know, I didn't know what to do. This was a moment where I had to break confidentiality. This is why I had to break confidentiality. This is what happened in this relationship. And I just felt I had to own it. And that really, and I felt it really worked, you know, I mean, it was a horrible thing for this young woman, but it worked really well in the book. And And it taught me that it was okay for me not to always have the answers, not to always know that I could be I was a fellow traveler I am a fellow traveler with my, I am the mother of a teenage girl, so I am a fellow traveler. I'm trying to figure this stuff out along with everybody else.
Yeah. Okay. I have one question. It's coming up here. Mark Grudberg, because I'm multitasking. We can end on this, I think. Okay. At what age in GN Girls and Sex, you wrote that you plan to share the book with your daughter when she reached high school. I'm using your books with parents and patients. What are the appropriate ages? He's guessing your daughter's bright and introspective. What ages do you think are appropriate?
Yeah, bright and introspective. She's also now 18. Well, I it's hard for me to answer that because I feel like it's up to kids vary so much at this point. People have told me that 13-year-olds are reading it, and I would not have given it to my child at 13 personally. I think she would have found it frightening. She wouldn't have gotten that much out of it. But I know that schools in high school, they tend to either have them read excerpts of it in 9th or 10th grade is usually when they first read it. And that seems to, depending on the kid, depending on the student, be a nice time. So I would say that, but I just always hesitate to sort of put a hard and fast rule on that. But I will say that I have so many readers who are teenagers or young adults, college students, young adults, and it's an audience that I'm really honored and grateful to be able to reach.
Thank you so much. Oh my goodness. The great Peggy Orenstein, her most recent book, now in paperback, is Boys and Sex: Young Men on Hookups, Love, Porn, Consent, and Navigating New Masculinity. So thank you so much, Peggy. And that brings us, last but not least, to finally Dean Koontz, the 30-second download for the 3 people in the world who don't know who Dean Koontz is. Dubbed by Rolling Stone America's most popular suspense novelist, Dean Koontz has published over 100 books, including 14 New York Times bestsellers, which have sold over 500 million books worldwide, translated into 38 languages. It's an astonishing feat Dean Koontz has been doing since the 1970s. In his 5th decade of publishing, he's 75 people. He's going stronger than ever. So in fact, I want to say that my chat with Dean Koontz was pre-recorded a little earlier this week, and we edited painfully because it was so fascinating. We could put the whole thing online. And what I want to say, watch closely, because whatever you knew about Dean Koontz before, I hope you learned that aside from being Dickensian, he's weird and mystical, believes in the magic inherent in daily life, and celebrates surprises, including one in this tape. So for the first time on Bookish, watch closely. Watch, and Dean Koontz is sitting in his studio. At one point, his dog Elsa will walk through the room and will raise her tail on a particular word he says. The first viewer that puts this word into the chat will get an amazing prize. That's all I can say. Okay, so to set up this conversation, know that just last week, the 2nd season of Nameless just launched. It's a fantastic short form fiction series, downloadable only on Amazon. Let's roll the tape. The Nameless series is in an intriguing new format. Can you describe it to our audience, and what inspired you to write in this form?
Well, I like the form of the novelette or novella because it's, as a writer, you have a shorter horizon. You're not working for 6-8 months trying to get to the end of the novel. It's a few weeks per story, and that's kind of a relief. But also, if you approach each story as if you're trying to give to the reader the same thing you would in a novel, the depth of character, the vividness of setting, and some thematic substance to it, the form can be very powerful because it is succinct. And that's sort of why I enjoy working in it. The way this came about was I had been writing a few things at this length to support new novels. That was something publishers wanted you to do at one point. And they sold very well. And Amazon Original Stories came to me and said, would you write one directly for us? And that was a story called Ricochet Joe. And we got along very well. So they came back and said, would you write 6 with the same character? And each would be a standalone, but there'd be a sort of overriding arc. So I went away and thought about it and came back with this concept. And it's been enormous fun. The first season, I think, exceeded all of our expectations. We've had millions of downloads of this, and they came back and said season 2. And usually I'm a very difficult human being, but I said immediately, yes, I'll do a season 2 because I wanted to know where this character went. We both agreed that probably 2 seasons was enough. And I feel that way too. Some series go on forever and ever, and often you wish they didn't. And I never want to be wearing out the welcome. So these follow this character for what amounts to now 12 stories. And they were, if they're as much fun to read as they were to write, then I'm a happy man.
Readers should know that the format is on Amazon. It's downloadable only. So you download each story like the next one coming up. They're cliffhangers, and all the titles are amazing. But also the audiobook section is fascinating. So you can also click down the audiobook and the narration by Eduardo Ballerini.
I will say this, since you brought up Eduardo, that he is brilliant, and his narration it couldn't be better. It's superb, and it carries you away. It's very vivid, dare I say, haunting at times, and never overdone, which sometimes is an argument of mine with audio, where somebody gets too effusive in their narration techniques. He finds that thin line to walk and never exceeds it. And we should also say that if you're a Prime member, you get all these for nothing. You can download the audio. The Kindle version, it's a big freebie, and I kind of like that too. I will say, when they first said, my agent said to me, they want you to write these stories, but they don't want to pay royalties. And I said, how does that work? That doesn't fit my business model. And they said, oh yeah, they'll pay you for them, and it'll work out just fine for you. But they want them to be available to as many readers as possible. And I just thought that was a wonderful way to do this, that we would reach out to as many people as possible. If you're not a Prime member, you can buy them. But if you are, you get them for free if you want. So it's been very exciting for that reason, and for a lot of others.
Can you tell the audience just a little bit about Nameless, this character?
Nameless is nameless. He doesn't know his name. He lives by a whole series of names. He has complete amnesia except for what he's been doing for the past 2 years. He doesn't know the past beyond that. He's a man in his late 30s. He thinks the amnesia he has is engineered, and that he wanted it to be engineered, that he wanted to forget his entire past because there's something in it that he can't live with. And what he does now, he's backed by some group that's very mysterious, run by somebody named Ace of Diamonds. You'll find out who in the second season Ace of Diamonds is. And he brings justice to people that the system doesn't bring it to. He looks, or his organization does, for people who need to be halted in the evil they're committing. And he documents it. He's not a vigilante. He doesn't operate on emotion. He operates on reason and fact. And as a consequence, when he goes after somebody, boy, do they deserve it. And I love that aspect of him. But I also like this side of it, that he mostly doesn't try to take them out himself. He tries often to set up circumstances where they destroy themselves, or those around them who are almost equally culpable destroy them. And that's a challenge as a writer. The agent who takes them out always with a gunshot is pretty easy to do, but to do what I had to have Nameless doing was a lot more complex and a lot more interesting and challenging. There is in season 2, each of these stories stands alone, but there's an overriding arc. And I would recommend in season 2, you start and read them in order, because the arc is pretty scary stuff, and it gets scarier if you follow them in order. But if you don't want to, I'm not going to come to your house and beat you up if you don't. So
Yeah, you'll have Nameless do it.
Yeah.
And leave no trace. No, I think that's right. And I think I the order builds, and also it makes you want to go back and reread again. And I think, for instance, The Scent of Roses is a theme that comes, and I was going, wait a minute, like I want to go back to the beginning, because there's little motifs that I want to go back and look at, because one of the wonderful things about your work, it's so layered, it's fun to read, it's fast, but even though Nameless has no name, he has many pseudonyms that are really a hilarious, like Ricardo de Verdad is on his driver's license because he's seeking truth. Kaiser Sose, Oliver Barrett from Love Story, Maxim de Winter, from Rebecca Edward Rochester, Jane Eyre, and John Ridd. And I go, who's John Lauren to do? So it is, I think if you start tracing through, it's very interesting. So, and I think that you've also had a bunch of pen names back in your, and you picked some of your pen names, Deanna Dwyer, K.R. Dwyer, Aaron Wolf. Like, what is it about name? Is there something of pleasure with you of playing with names?
Well, there was not a lot of pleasure in having all those pen names. That was on the advice of agents and publishers, because they tend to want, not my current publisher, but in my early days, the publishers, when you're starting out, I like to write different things. And if it was even slightly different from the previous book, the agent publisher would say, oh no, you can't put that under your name. You have to put it under a pen name that does only that kind of book. And I was young and naive, shall we say stupid. And I took that ill advice. And as a consequence, every time I would write something somewhat different, there was a new name. Ultimately, years later, I took the best of those books and put them under my name. And lo and behold, readers liked them just as much. So a lot of what's common wisdom in publishing is common, but it isn't wisdom. As for the names of Nameless, they're little Easter eggs. They're little things, the sort of sub-themal things that point the reader to other stories, other modes of other writers I've enjoyed, or movies. And it's kind of fun to do that and give somebody that. When somebody tumbles to one of them, then they begin to realize, oh, a lot of these names might mean something. Let's find out what. And that's just another way to have fun with it all.
You have the Sleepy Time Inn in a panhandle of Texas, which is almost kind of a restaurant at the end of the universe, kind of cafe, where there is a free lending library. There's a lot of John D. MacDonald books, The Waitress Elderly. It's like, it is interesting how reading, I think, is kind of like a separate universe in your books. And I think that, I think the evil characters do not read and the good characters do. Is that safe to say? But the evil characters read a certain kind of thing, like a eugenics futuristic thing, but the good characters read John D. MacDonald.
The bad characters may spend a lot of time reading ideology. The good characters spend their time reading fiction.
Right.
Because I have often said there's more truth in fiction than nonfiction if fiction is properly devised. Also, the challenge in these books is Nameless is moving all over the place. And between season 1 and season 2, he's been to Michigan, to Arizona, to Texas a couple of times. He's in California, and wherever he goes, he's running into sort of different culture, different places. And part of the challenge is to capture that place and make sure that people who live there say, yeah, that's where I live. That's the way it is. And that was an extra thing. I must say that when I started the series, didn't initially dawn on me until I started writing the stories, and he was moving around, and I thought, oops, I've got to really know, I've got to give you a flavor of the place that's genuine and real. So when I got to the Texas Panhandle, I just wanted that to be such the antithesis of some of the places he's moved through. It's a small town. It's a small town people. There is very little interest there in the bigger issues of the world that seem to consume us all. And as a consequence, there's a kind of strange peace to it. And that's kind of interesting, because that's what he needs at a certain time.
Your books are so brilliant, and especially something like this, it might seem to people like you work from outlines, but famously you don't. And I think you'd said in around 1997 that you started letting your characters, you didn't tell them what to do, you let them go. Can you describe what that process was like a little bit more?
Yeah, it's actually, I think it started before that, started about in the mid 80s, and with a book called Strangers. And I had been so frustrated, I would write an outline, which the publisher would buy, then say, go write the book. But when I wrote the book, things started changing. And I felt they were changing for the better. The book I'm delivering is much better than the outline. But the publisher had sat on that outline for a year or longer. And when they got the book and read it, it wasn't exactly like the outline. And the response was, oh, this isn't what we bought. I expected the response to be, wow, this isn't what we bought. And when it was so different, I finally just got exhausted. And I said, no more outlines. I was finally able to afford to write a book on spec. And I started no outlines and didn't know if that would work. And that was the first book I had that hit the bestseller list. And since then, I think 70 some have, and 14 have been #1. And that told me that it was much better in terms of developing character to let the character go, to not have preconceived ideas of where they are going to go, why they're going to go there, and how it's going to turn out. I have said, young writers find this very difficult to understand. I have said that I give the writer or the character free will and just let them go. And they often go places I never would have contemplated. And it'll happen in an instant. It'll happen in a sentence where you're typing and the character thinks something that is coming to you at that moment, as if it's coming out of the character, and you halt, you go, no, that's a very bad idea. But I learned if the character is about to go there or think that or do that, let it happen, because something is going on in your subconscious that you're not connected to on a conscious level. And that is what this character is telling you. Here's where I need to go. And it's eerie. It really is like they're real people and they're running with you, chasing them as fast as you can. But it leads to better characters, I think, and more exciting stories.
Well, of course, beginning writers will ask, how do you get there? How do you get to that moment? Do you take a pill? Is there a protein drink? How do you get to that moment mid-sentence where that happens?
Yeah, one pill makes you happy and one pill makes you small. And I've never been asked how you get there. I'd have to think a minute, maybe a couple of years, but I think what it is I write. It looks like I do write at high volume, but it looks like I write fast when I really don't. I write a page 20, 30 times, maybe sometimes 10, because I have such self-doubt. I'm always polishing, because I think the prose has to move you through the book as if it's butter. And yet it needs to use the English language as well as it can be used, or at least as well as I can use it. Those two things are actually one and the same. If you're using it as well as you can use it, it will flow. When you're doing that, I get slowly, page by page through the book. I have a lot of time to let those characters brew, to come into their fullness. I think that's part of it. I know that a lot of writers have to outline, and I know a lot of writers have to write a quick draft and then go back just to get it done, and then go back and fix it. For me, and I encourage some writers to at least think about this, the quick draft often leaves it you doing the down and dirty version. And then it gets very hard to clean it up because it's a bigger chore. And you think, well, I've already got the story told. I shouldn't be spending all this. You start calming yourself into not doing what you ought to do. If you go through it more slowly, more thoughtfully, I think you end up with not only a better story, but a story that's better told. And you get more time for those characters to evolve. That's one thing. The other is, I don't know, it's sort of just trusting the process. I think if you have a character in the first few chapters that you like and you think people will like and have sympathy for, that's everything. But you've got to not be deluding yourself. You have to be real. There are times I get to a point, I think this character isn't working. I have to tear it up and back up and come up with a revised version. But the moment they work, that's when they take over. So it's a magical thing in some ways.
So I was hoping, as a real Koontz maniac, I could ask you a slightly weird and mystical question, and you can answer if you will. So the fourth book of the Nameless Season 2 is called Light Has Weight, but Darkness Does Not. And one of the fantastic characters is Asteria, sort of a girl who's running away with her mother from, a strange commune, if you will. And she is obsessed with science fiction, and she reads a book about giant reptiles overtaking a system of destructive reptiles of 9 planets. But what she loves is the idea that they traveled by solar sailed ships, these light sails that went everywhere, and that she told her mother about it, that light is both a wave and a particle, which is that quantum mechanics that you're interested in. And her mother says, I've never, light, the wind ruffles my hair, light doesn't. And then Asteria says that she is knocked down by light all the time, just the fact that it existed. So the weird and mystical question, and I know that you hold your evil characters and good characters in balance. Some people say, when I told a friend I was interviewed, she goes, oh my God, Dean Koontz's novels scare me so much. You've been known to scare grandmothers with your evil characters, but right? But you've said good people have to face evil in order to deal with it. So to what extent, and with this mystical thing when your characters go on a journey, are your books light versus evil? Do you think books can change the world for the better?
Well, first let me back up and say I scare grandmothers with my books, not me personally. I don't go out there looking for grandmothers to scare, but they're scary in my books, but they also are absolutely riddled with hope. I am not a pessimist. I am not. I'm not a nihilist. And I do believe in humanity. I do believe in the future. I believe everything can go badly wrong, but somehow good people will struggle through it, or we hope they will. I do try what you said, that balance. There's certain things I want to do. I don't want to write a villain or an antagonist that is so glamorous that people say, oh, how cool. That's a very common thing in fiction. And I don't want somebody identifying with the evil character more than they do with the good. That strikes me as a dangerous sort of thing. So one way I deal with that is, even as scary as a character might be, even as evil as he might be, I always make the point that there's something of the fool in every evil character, because evil works in the short term, but if you look at history, it doesn't work in the long term. Therefore, when you choose evil, no matter what brand it is, and every one of these stories has a different sort of evil character caught up in a different kind of ideological madness. And all of those, there's a humorous side to it, a darkly humorous side. And I always try to capture that in their voice. And partly that comes out of their overweening sense of themselves, over their narcissism and their arrogance. And that can give you a lot of fodder for humor. And when I have the good characters, I also like them to have sometimes kind of humorous attitude toward the world. The story you mentioned, Light Has Weight, but Darkness Does Not, that really is speaking not only to the science fiction novel that girl quotes, which is about the physical quality of light that can be used to move a ship across the universe, but also light, meaning goodness, and doing the right thing has weight, and doing the wrong thing does not. It can damage the world, but it never makes anything permanent. It only destroys what is good, and good revives.
So you're 75, and again, writing for 5 decades. And then readers will sometimes say, do you ever run out of ideas, et cetera, et cetera? But no, the opposite. You said this is the happiest time of your life in terms of writing, where you are now.
It's the most creative, I think, in many ways. And that's, I don't think you run out of ideas if you keep your mind open to the world. If you're interested in a wide variety of things, I'm interested in quantum mechanics, molecular biology, this, that, and the other thing, a wide interest in art. I mean, painting, sculpture, all of that. Anything you're interested in feeds you, and without any pain. These are things you love, you're interested in, and suddenly here bubbles up an idea out of that. Sometimes you know exactly where that idea came from, what inspired it. Sometimes you have no idea whatsoever. It almost seems to have been beamed into your head by William Shatner or by a higher power than that. And as a consequence, it's mystical, it's wonderful, and just keep yourself alive and open to the world. And I feel exactly that way. And I'm working with people now who, though I'm delivering them books, I'm about to deliver the 5th, and I've delivered 12 novelettes, and a lot of them are different one from the other. I've never had a, wait a minute, what is this moment? There's been this creativity and enthusiasm with whom I'm working with that really energizes you, and it's an important thing.
The Nameless series is in an intriguing new format.
Oh my goodness. I am back. Oh my gosh. Okay, Sam, I just have to take 1 minute and give a shout out where I'm going. I don't know, like it too. Oh my gosh. We have Catherine Cooper, Jennifer Dittmer, Colleen Monahan, Paula Casaretto, Cartha Tennille, Teresa Schreiner, Robert Friedrich, Nada Chatwell, Cheryl Ann Park, Gwen Hembroke, Sylvia Wisnowski, Carolyn Park, Mary Janice Rodriguez, Victoria Morfin, Joan Cantor, Stephen Warshulski, Judy Hale, David Herrig, Carol E., Karen Terry, Kenny Jones, Linda Kai, Meredith, Kim Rivella, Jennifer Koenig, FS, Sandy Bierstuff, Patricia Downing, Linda Bowen, Myrna Robinson, V, Deborah Moss, Cheryl McClooney, Kathleen Brady, Carolyn Clark, Judy D, Tracy Lideker, Mark Bongiovanni, Teresa Zuelski, Wendy Bro, Michelle Kissel, Karen Barnett, and Annie Zimmerman, and oh my God, Catherine Brady, Matt Woods, Mary Sue Bruckoverms, Stephen Warshulski. Apologies if I butchered your name. That was phenomenal.
Right?
Magical. But I think our winner is, and we will post the full interview, the winner is Jennifer Dittmer. The word was magical. So Jennifer, we will contact, like if we have your email, you get your choice of one of the 3 books tonight. Actually, you can have the Lisa C book sent to you. You can have Peggy Orenstein's Boys and Sex, or you can have a Dean Koontz book. Since it's on Amazon for free, you can pick a paperback and we'll send it to you and we'll contact you after.
Or we could get also a signed copy of one of your books too. So
also a signed copy of one of mine as well, The Mad Woman in the Roomba, if that's your flavor, Jennifer Dittmer. So congratulations and thanks to all of you for playing. That is it.
Thank you. That was fantastic as always. Thank you, Sandra. Good luck on your show next week. The Bitch is back.
Roadstage.org, streaming June 23rd to 30th.
There we go. Happy hours too. And thank you, Lisa and Peggy, and of course, Dean. Oh, we just love. We'll be back, you guys, July 16th. I have to check the dates. Yes, July 16th. And we're going to have Carl Hyacin, Mark Haskell Smith, Gina Frangello, and the woman of American letters, Joyce Carol Oates. Also, to our subscribers, please check out the Sunday Bookish Summer Read Supplement coming this Sunday in your newspaper. I'd like to invite you to check out our other programs at scng.com/virtual events. You can find the recordings, all of our shows for everything on scng.com/virtual events. And next Friday at 5, come back for the Get Frumpy happy hour with columnist Marla Jo Fisher and special guests. And please support local journalism, read our newspapers, and visit our websites to stay informed and perhaps equally important, entertained. If you'd like to share your thoughts from today, or if you have additional questions or suggestions, email us at events@scng.com. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks again.